Fireside Tailes with Wolfgang, Episode 15. Originally broadcast on GWC Productions YouTube channel, CAPS Media Television Channel 6, KPPQ-LP Ventura at 104.1 FM, and on the KPPQ Podcast Network. Greetings and salutations. I'm Hunter Ackerman, here to read some classic literature for you and my beastly feline companion Wolfgang. So Wolfus, what do you want to hear? This is called Desiderata by Max Ehrman. It's from 1927. What's cool about this poem is it's largely prose. It's not the structure of the poem. It's not the beauty of the images invoked. It's more like a collection of good advice. And I think part of the reason that I've been feeling so good, so optimistic, so hopeful about the future, so zen today, is without realizing it, for the majority of today, I've been taking the advice of this particular poem, which seems appropriate to read right now. This is Desiderata by Max Ehrman, 1927. Go placidly amid the noise and haste, and remember what peace there may be in silence. As far as possible, without surrender, be on good terms with all persons. Speak your truth quietly and clearly, and listen to others, even the dull and the ignorant. They too have their story. Avoid loud and aggressive persons. They are vexations to the spirit. If you compare yourself with others, you may become vain and bitter. For always there will be greater and lesser persons than yourself. Enjoy your achievements as well as your plans, and never take Instagram all that seriously. Keep interested in your own career, however humble. It is a real possession in the changing fortunes of time. Exercise caution in your business affairs, for the world is full of trickery, but let this not blind you to what virtue there is. Many persons strive for high ideals, and everywhere life is full of heroism. Be yourself. Especially, do not feign affection. Neither be cynical about love. For in the face of all aridity and disenchantment, it is as perennial as the grass. Take kindly the counsel of the years, gratefully surrendering the things of youth. Nurture strength of spirit to shield you in sudden misfortune, but do not distress yourself with dark imaginings. Many fears are born of fatigue and loneliness. Beyond a wholesome discipline, be gentle with yourself. You are a child of the universe. No less than the trees and the stars, you have a right to be here. And whether or not it is clear to you, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. Therefore, be at peace with God, whatever you conceive him to be. And whatever your labors and aspirations in the noisy confusion of life, keep peace with your soul. With all its sham, drudgery, and broken dreams, it is still a beautiful world. Be cheerful. strive to be happy. I guarantee that if Max Ehrman had lived anywhere closer to now than 1927, he definitely would have inserted, "Don't take Instagram too seriously." Mary E. Wilkins Freeman. She lived from 1852. She died right before the Great Depression, or right at the beginning of the Great Depression. She died in 1930. I love this story. This is just deliciously sweet and charming. This is How Fidelia Went to the Store by Mary E. Wilkins Freeman. "I don't know what we're gonna do," said Aunt Maria Crooker. She sat in a large armchair and held in her lap a bowl of sugar and butter that she was creaming. Aunt Maria filled up the chair from arm to arm, for she was very portly. She had a large, rosy, handsome face, and she creamed with such energy that she panted for breath. "Well, I don't know either," rejoined her sister, Mrs. Lennox. "I can't go to the store with my lame foot, that's certain." "Well, I know I can't," said Aunt Maria with an additional emphasis. "I haven't walked 2 miles for 10 years, and I don't believe I should get to that store and back to save my life." "I don't believe you could either. I don't know what's going to be done. We can't make the cake without raisins anyhow. It's the queerest thing how Father happened to forget those raisins. Now, here he is done gone over to East Dighton after the new cow, and Cynthia gone to Keene to buy her bonnet, and me with a scalded foot, and you not able to walk, and not one raisin in the house to put into that wedding cake." Well, Mrs. Lennox stated the case in full with a despairing eloquence, and Aunt Maria sighed and wrinkled her forehead. "If there were only any neighbors you could borrow from," she observed. "Well, there ain't any neighbors twixt here and the store except the Allens and the Simmonses, and the Allens are so tight they never put raisins into their Thanksgiving pies. And Mrs. Allen, she told me they didn't. She said she thought most folks made their pies way too rich, and her folks liked them just as well without raisins. As for the Simmonses, I don't believe they've seen a raisin from one year's end to the other. They're lucky if they can get enough common things to eat for all those children. I don't know what's going to be done. Here's the dressmaker coming tomorrow, and Cynthia going to be married in 2 weeks, and the cake ought to be made today if ever it's going to be." "Yes, it had," assented Aunt Maria. "We put it off full long enough anyway. Wedding cake ain't near so good unless it stands a little while. Don't I know it?" Just then, there was this shrill, prolonged squeak. It came from the yard. Doors and the windows were open. It was a very warm day. "What's that?" cried Aunt Maria. "Oh, it's nothing but Fidelia's little wagon. She's dragging it outside round the yard." The two women, they looked at each other. It was as if a simultaneous idea had suddenly come to the both of them. Aunt Maria gave expression to it first. "Fidelia couldn't go, could she? Could she? Maria Crooker, that little thing? She ain't 6 years old, and she ain't never been nowhere alone. You suppose I'm going to send her a mile to that store?" Mrs. Lennox's tone was full of vehement indignation, but her eyes still met Aunt Maria's with that doubtful and reflective expression. "I don't see a mite of harm in it," Aunt Maria maintained sturdily. She set her bowl of sugar and butter on the table and leaned forward with a hand on each apron knee. I know Fidelia ain't but 5-year-old, but she brighter than some children of 7. And it's just a straight road to the stove. And she can't get lost to save her life. And she knows where it is. You took her down to Miss Rose 3 or 4 weeks ago, didn't you? Yeah, that day Father went down for grain. I suppose she would remember. Of course she would remember. I don't see one thing, as far as I'm concerned, to hinder that child going down to the store and bringing us home some raisins. I used to go on errands before I was as old as she is. Folks didn't fuss over their children so much in my day. Well, said Miss Lennox finally with a great sigh, I don't know, but I may as well send her. Mrs. Lennox was much smaller than her sister, and she had a rather sickly but pleasant face. She had to push a chair before her as she walked, for she had scalded her foot quite badly the week before, and now it was all swathed in bandages. It had been a very unfortunate accident in more ways than one for Cynthia. Her elder daughter was going to be married soon, and the family was busily engaged in the wedding preparations. It was very hard for poor Mrs. Lennox to have to limp about with one knee in a chair while she made wedding cake and arranged for the bridal festivities, but she made the best of it. Now she pushed over to the door and called, Fidelia! Fidelia! Directly, the squeak increased to an agonizing degree. The rattle of small wheels accompanied it, and Fidelia came trudging around the corner of the house. She was a chubby little girl, and her blue tear seemed rather tight for her. She had a round, rosy face and an innocent and honest black eyes. She wore a small shaker bonnet with a green cape, and she stubbed her toes into the grass with every step she took. Don't stub your toes so, girl, said her mother admonishingly. You'll wear all your shoes all out. Fidelia immediately advanced with soft pats, like a kitten. When she got into the kitchen, her mother took off her shaker bonnet and looked at her critically. You'll have to have your hair brushed, said she. Fidelia, do you remember how you went with Mother down to Miss Rose's 3, maybe 4 weeks ago? Fidelia nodded and winked. There was a big pussycat there. You remember? He was huge and gray, kind of scary looking, except for how he purr and lick your hand. And Miss Rose gave you a cookie. Fidelia's affirmative wink seemed to give out sparkles, especially about the kitty cat. Well, you remember how we went to the side door and knocked with some roses over the top of it, and Miss Rose, she came to that side door. Remember all this? Fidelia, intensely attentive, standing before her mother and Aunt Maria, remembered about the side door. Well, you remember how there was a piazza across the front of the house, don't you? Father hitched the horse to a post there. Well, there's another door there opening onto the piazza. Don't you remember? A door with panes of glass in it like a window? Fidelia, she shook her head. She nodded. She did indeed remember. Well, now, Fidelia, do you suppose you can go down to the store, buy some raisins for your mother to put in Sister Cynthia's wedding cake all by yourself? And be a real smart little girl, put in Aunt Maria. Fidelia gave one ecstatic roll of her sweet black eyes at them, and she broke out into a shout, Let me go! Let me go! Let me go! She oscillated on her small stubbed toes like a bird preparing to fly, and she tugged energetically at her mother's apron. I'll give you a penny, and you can buy yourself a nice stick of red and white twisted candy, added her mother. Fidelia actually made a little dash for the door then, but her mother caught her up. Stop! she said in an admonishing voice, which was quieting to Fidelia and made her realize that the red and white candy was still in the future. Now, you just wait a minute, child. Not be in such a hurry. You ain't going this way with your apron just as dirty as poison and your hair all in a snarl. No. You gotta have on your clean apron. And you gotta have your hair brushed and your face gotta be washed. So, Fidelia climbed obediently into her high chair and sat with her eyes screwed up and her fists clenched while her mother polished her face faithfully with a wet, soapy end of a towel and combed the snarls out of her hair. When it was all done, her cheeks being very red and shiny and her hair very damp and smooth when she was arrayed in her clean, starched white tier, and she had her shaker bonnet tied on with an emphatic square bow, she stood in the door and she drank in the parting instructions. Her eyes were wide and intent. Her mouth drooped soberly at the corners. The importance of the occasion had begun to impress her. She held a penny tight in her hand. The raisins were to be charged, it not being judged advisable to trust Fidelia with so much money. I don't believe that little thing can carry 3 pounds of raisins, Mrs. Lennox said to Aunt Maria. She was becoming more and more uneasy about Fidelia's going. Well, let her take her little wagon and drag 'em. That'll be just the thing, said Aunt Maria complacently. So, Fidelia started down the road, trundling behind her the little squeaking cart. It was a warm July day, and it was very dusty. Directly when Fidelia started, she forgot her mother's injunction about stubbing her toes. She disappeared in a small cloud of dust, for she walked in the middle of the road and flirted it up with a great delight. In the course of the mile, Fidelia met one horse team. It was an old rocking chaise and a white horse, and an old farmer was driving. He drove slower when he came alongside of Fidelia. When he had fairly passed her, he stopped entirely, twisted about in his seat, raised his voice. "Oh, now, whose little gal are you?" he asked. Fidelia was a little frightened. Instead of giving her father's name, she gave her own with shy precision. "Fidelia Ames Lennox," she said, retiring into her little shaker bonnet. "Now, you ain't over here being running away now, be you?" Fidelia's pride was touched. "I'm going to the store for my mother," she announced in quite a shrill tone. Then she took to her heels, and the little wagon trundled after with a wilder squeak than ever. Fidelia kept saying over to herself, "3 pounds of your best raisins, and Mr. Lennox will come in and pay you. 3 pounds of your best raisins, and Mr. Lennox will come in and pay you. 3 pounds." Her mother and Aunt Maria wished after she had gone that they had written it out on a piece of paper, but they hadn't thought of that. But Aunt Maria said she knew that such a bright child as Fidelia would remember 3 pounds of raisins when she had been told over and over and charged not to come home without them. Fidelia had started about 10 o'clock in the morning, and her mother and Aunt Maria had agreed that they would not worry if she should not return until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. That would allow more than an hour for the mile walk each way, give plenty of time for a rest between, for Fidelia had been instructed to go into the stall and sit down on a stool and rest a while before starting upon her return trip. Likely as not, Miss Rose will give her a cookie or something, Aunt Maria had whispered to Miss Lennox. So, when noon came, the two women pictured Fidelia sitting, perched on a little stool in the stall, being fed with candy and cookies and made much of, maybe even eating dinner with the Rose family and petting their huge gray beast cat happily. Mrs. Rose made so much of her when you took her there before that I shouldn't wonder a mite if she'd keep her for dinner, said Aunt Maria. She promulgated this theory more strenuously when 1 o'clock came and Fidelia had not appeared. Of course that's what it is, she kept repeating. It'd take him a good hour to eat dinner all together. I shouldn't be a bit surprised if she didn't get here before 2 o'clock. I think you're dreadful silly to worry, Jane. For poor Mrs. Lennox was pushing her chair every few minutes over to the door where she would stand, her face all one anxious frown, straining her eyes for a glimpse of the small figure trudging up the road. She had made the blueberry dumpling that Fidelia loved for dinner, and it was keeping warm on the back of the stove. Neither she nor Aunt Maria had eaten so much as a mouthful. When 2 o'clock came, Mrs. Lennox broke down entirely. Oh dear, she wailed, doing that ugly sobbing cry. Oh dear, I ought to have known better than to let her go. Aunt Maria was now pacing heavily between her chair and the door, but she still maintained a brave front. For goodness sake, Jane, don't give up so, says she. I don't see anything to worry about. For my part, they're just keeping her for dinner. At 2:30, Mrs. Lennox stood up with a determined air. I ain't going to wait here another minute, says she. I'm going to find her. I don't know, but she's fell into the brook or she got run over, eaten by that Wolfgang, something. Mrs. Lennox's face was all drawn up with anxiety. I'd like to know how you're going, said Aunt Maria. I guess I can push this chair along the road just as well as in a room. Pretty looking sight you'll be going a mile with one knee in a wooden chair. I guess I don't care much how I look if only I find her. Miss Lennox's voice broke into a long wail now. You just sit down and keep calm, said Aunt Maria. If anybody's going, I am. Oh, you can't. Yes, I can too. I can't. I ain't quite so far gone that I can't walk a mile. You ain't gonna step on that scald foot and get all laid up with that wedding coming off. Not if I know it. I'm just gonna slip on my gator shoes and my sunbonnet and take the big green umbrella to keep the sun off. Well, when Aunt Maria was equipped and started, Mrs. Lennox watched her progress down the road with frantic impatience. It seemed to her that she could have gone faster with her chair. Truth was, poor Aunt Maria, plodding heavily along in her gator shoes, holding the green umbrella over her flaming face, she made slow and painful progress. And it was well that Mr. Lennox and Cynthia Lennox came home 2 hours before they were expected. It was 3 o'clock when Mr. Lennox came driving into the yard with the open buggy. Cynthia, erect and blooming, with her big hat box in her lap, sat beside him, and the New Jersey cow, fastened by a rope to the tail of the buggy, came on behind with melancholy moos. Cynthia had bought her wedding bonnet sooner than she expected. So she had come home on the 3 o'clock train instead of the 5, and her father had bought the cow sooner than he expected, and had come to the railroad crossing just about that time that Cynthia's train arrived. So he had stopped and taken in her and her hat box, and they had all ridden home together. Well, Mrs. Lennox stood in the kitchen door when they drove in. "Oh, Mother," Cynthia cried out, "I've had splendid luck. I got the handsomest wedding bonnet." "I guess you won't care, child, much about bonnets," answered her mother. "Fidelia's lost." She spoke calmly and slowly. Then she began to weep wildly and just lament. It was quite a time before she could make the case plain to them. And Cynthia and her hat box and Mr. Lennox and the horse and the buggy and cow all remained before her in a petrified halt. Soon as Mr. Lennox fairly understood, he sprang out of the buggy, untied the cow, led her into the barn, turned the team around with a sharp grate of the wheels, jumped in again, and gathered up the reins. Cynthia, her rosy cheeks quite pale, still sat in her place, and the tears splashed on her new hat box cover. Mrs. Lennox had set her chair outside the door and followed it with a painful effort. "Stop, Father," she cried. "I'm going too." "Oh, Mother, you can't," said Mr. Lennox and Cynthia together. "I'm going. You needn't say a word. Father, you get out and you help me in there." Well, Mr. Lennox got out and lifted while Cynthia pulled. Mrs. Lennox's injured foot suffered, but she set her mouth hard and she said nothing. They started at a good pace, 3 on a seat, with Mr. Lennox in the middle. He was driving. They got about halfway to the stall when they overtook Aunt Maria. Aunt Maria, with the green umbrella overhead, was proceeding steadily, with a sideways motion that seemed more effective than the forward one. "I'll get out and let her get in," said Cynthia. "No," said her father, "it won't do. It'll break the springs. We can't ride 3 on a seat with Aunt Maria anyhow, and I gotta drive." So they passed Aunt Maria. "Don't go any farther, Aunt Maria," Cynthia called out sobbingly over her shoulder back to her. "You just sit down there on the wall and you rest." But Aunt Maria shook her head. She could not speak, but she kept on. It was 3:15 when they reached the Rose house and the stall. The stall was in the front of the house, and the Rose family occupied the rear portion. The house stood on this little street corner, so a good deal of it was visible, and the whole establishment had this shut-up air. Not a single farmer's wagon stood in front of the stall. However, as Mr. Lennox drove up, a woman's head appeared at a window. Then a side door opened, and she stood there. She had on a big apron, and her face was flushed as if she had been over the stove. She held a great wooden spoon, too. She began talking to the Lennoxes, but they paid no attention to her. Their eyes were riveted upon the stall door. There was a speck of white against its dark front, and suddenly it moved. It was Fidelia's white pinafore. "Wow, there's Fidelia!" gasped Cynthia. She jumped out, not waiting for her father to turn the wheel, and ran to the stall front door. The hat box rolled out and the lid came off, and there was her wedding bonnet right out in the dust in front of God and everybody. But she didn't mind that. She caught Fidelia. "Oh, you naughty little girl, where you been all this time?" she cried. Fidelia's eyes took on a bewildered stare. Her mouth puckered more and more. She clung to her sister and she sobbed something that was quite inaudible. It was quite a time for her father and mother, and Cynthia and Mrs. Rose, surrounding her with attention, could gather the import of it all was that she had knocked, and nobody had come to the door. "You knocked?" gasped Mrs. Rose. "Why, the poor little lamb! Here, Mr. Rose and Sam have been away all day, and I've been making currant jelly out in the kitchen. And there's the little bell on the counter the customers always ring when there ain't nobody around. I've been listening for that all day. It's been so hot, everybody's been out making hay, and I don't suppose a soul has been near the store since 9 o'clock this morning. And she stood there and knocked. I never heard of anything like that in my life. See here, sweetie, haven't you been asleep?" Fidelia shook her head in a sulky and downcast manner, but there was a suspiciously flushed look about her, and they agreed it was more than probable that a nap on the store steps had softened and shortened her raisin vigil. Well, Mrs. Lennox had her up in the wagon on her lap. She took her shaky bonnet off and smoothed her hair and kissed her. "She thought she'd go knock, I suppose," said she. "I ought to have told her she didn't have to when she went to the store. Poor little soul. Mother won't send her to the store again till she's bigger." "I knocked and I knocked," wailed Fidelia just piteously. She looked cross and worn out. Mrs. Rose ran into the house and brought out a plate of cookies and a mug of milk. Then Fidelia sat in her mother's lap and ate and drank and felt comforted. But after the raisins had been finally purchased, Cynthia's bonnet picked up out of the dust and shaken off, the little squeaking wagon stowed under the seat of the buggy, and the horse team turned around, Fidelia set up a grievous and injured cry. My candy! I ain't got my candy!" And she held up to view the little copper cent still clutched in her moist little fist. "Oh, that poor little lamb, she shall have a candy," cried Mrs. Rose. Fidelia had never seen such a handful of candy as Mrs. Rose brought out from the store. There was a twisted red and white stick of peppermint, pink checkerberry, clear barley, a stick of every kind in the glass jars of Mr. Rose's store window. And Mrs. Rose would not take Fidelia's 1 penny at all. She bade her keep it until she came back to the store again. Aunt Maria was almost up to the store by the time they left it, and it was decided she should remain and make a call upon Mrs. Rose while Mr. Lennox carried the others home. Then he would return for her. Aunt Maria folded her green umbrella, sank down on the doorstep, and Mrs. Rose brought her a palm leaf fan and a glass of ginger water. "I ain't walked a mile for 10 years, gasped Aunt Maria. "But I'm so thankful that child's safe that I can't think of anything else." There were tears in her eyes as she watched the wagon load disappearing under the green branches of the elm trees, and Fidelia, in her mother's lap, rode along and sucked a stick of barley candy in silent bliss. Griefs in childhood soon turned to memories. Straight away she sucked her barley candy. Fidelia's long and painful vigil at the stall became a thing of the past. This story was published in 1897. Hamlin, Garland, some of his common themes. He was a novelist. He was a poet. He wrote a lot of short stories. But he's best known. He's a little bit like John Prine. John Prine was a songwriter, but they were both, I think, best known for their portrayal of fiction that involved hard-working, salt-of-the-earth folk. Hamlin, Garland, particularly with Midwestern farmers. And there's usually some sort of triumph in Hamlin Garland's narratives involving the strength of individual will. With all that said, from 1897, this is Before the Low Green Door by Hamlin Garland. Matilda Bent was dying. There was no doubt of that now, if there had been before. The gruff old physician, one of the many overworked and underpaid country doctors, shook his head and pushed by Joe Bent, her husband, as he passed through the room which served as dining room, sitting room, and parlor. The poor fellow slouched back to his chair by the stove as if dazed, and before he could speak again, the doctor was gone. Mrs. Ridings was just coming up the walk as the doctor stepped out of the door. "Oh, doctor, how is she?" "She is a dying woman, madam." "Oh, don't say that, doctor. What's the matter?" "Cancer." Then the news was true. "I don't know anything of the news, Mrs. Ridings, but Mrs. Bent is dying from the effects of a cancer, primarily, which she has had for years. Since her last child, which died in infancy, you remember." But doctor, she never told me." "Neither did she tell me, but no matter now. I've done all I can for her. If you can make death any easier for her, go and do it. You will find some opiate powders there with directions. Keep the pain down at all hazards. Don't let her suffer. That is useless. She's likely to last a day or two, but if any change comes tonight, send for me." When the good matron entered the dowdy, suffocating little room where Matilda Bent lay gasping for breath, she was sick for a moment with sympathetic pain. There the dying woman lay, her world narrowed to 4 close walls, propped up on the pillows near the one little window. Her eyes seemed very large and bright, and the brow, made prominent by the sinking away of the cheeks, gave evidence that it was an uncommon woman who lay there quietly, waiting the death angel. She smiled and lifted her eyebrows in a ghastly way. Oh, Marthy," she breathed. "Why, Matilda, I didn't know you was so bad, or I'd have come before. Why didn't you let me know?" said Mrs. Ridings, kneeling by the bed and taking the ghostly hands of the sufferer in her own warm and soft palms. She shuddered as she kissed the thin lips. "I think you'll soon be round again," she added, in the customary mockery of an attempt at cheer. The other woman stared and started just slightly, turned her head, and gazed on her old friend long and intently. The hollowness of her neighbor's words stung her. "I hope not, Marty. I'm ready to go. I want to go. I don't care to live." The two women communed by looking for a long time in each other's eyes, as if to get at the very secretest desires and hopes of the heart. Tears fell from Martha's eyes upon the cold and nerveless hands of her friend, poor, faithful hands, hacked and knotted and worn by 30 years of ceaseless daily toil. They lay there motionless upon the coverlet, pathetic protest for all the world to see. "Oh, Matilde, I wish I could do something for you. I want to help you so. I feel so bad that I didn't come before. Ain't they something? Anything?" Yes, Marthy. Yes, just sit there till I die." "It won't be long," whispered the pale lips. The sufferer, as usual, was calmer than her visitor, and her eyes were thoughtful. I will, but must you go? Can't something be done? Don't you want the minister to be sent for?" No, I'm all ready. I ain't afraid to die. I ain't worth saving now. Oh, Marthy, I never thought I'd come to this, did you? I never thought I'd die so early in life and die unsatisfied. She lifted her head a little as she gasped out these words with an intensity of utterance that thrilled her hearer, a powerful, penetrating earnestness that burned like fire. "Are you satisfied?" pursed the steady lips. "My life's a failure, Marthy. I've known it all along, but every single detail except my children. Oh, Marthy, what'll become of them? This is a hard world." The amazed Martha could only chafe the hands and note sorrowfully the frightful changes in the face of her friend. The weirdly calm, slow voice began to shake a little. "I'm dying, Marthy. Without ever getting to the sunny place we girls used to think we'd get to by and by, I've been getting deeper and deeper in the shade till it's mostly dark. There ain't been no rest, no hope for me, Marthy, none. I ain't... There, Tilly. Don't talk so. Don't, dear, don't. Just try to think how bright it'll be over there." "I don't know nothing about over there. I'm talking about here. I ain't had no chance here, Marthy. He will heal all your care. He can't wipe out my sufferings here. He can, and he will. He can wipe away every tear and heal every wound. No, he can't. God himself can't wipe out what has simply been. Oh, Maddie, if I was only there in the past, if I was only young and purty again. You know how tall I was? How we used to run? Oh, Maddie, if only I was there. The world was all bright then, wasn't it? We didn't expect to work all our days. Life looked like a meadow full of daisies and pinks, and the nicest ones and the sweetest birds was just a little ways on where the sun was. It didn't look... Wasn't we happy? Yes, dear, but you mustn't talk so much. The good woman thought Matilda's mind was wandering. Don't you want some medicine? Ain't your fever rising? But the daisies and pinks all turned to weeds. She went on, waiting a little. When we picked 'em, and the sunny place has always been behind me, and the dark always before me. Oh, if only I was there in the sun where the pinks and the daisies are. You mustn't talk so, Maddie. Think about your children. You ain't sorry you had them, right? They've been a comfort to you. You ain't sorry you had them. I ain't glad, was the unhesitating reply of the failing woman. And then she went on. in growing excitement. They'll have to grow old just as I have, get bent and gray, and die. They ain't been much comfort to me. The boys are like their father, and Julie's weak. There ain't no happiness for such as me and them. She paused for breath, and Miss Ridings, not knowing what to say, did better than speak. She fell to stroking the poor face, and the hands getting more restless each moment. It was as if Matilda Fletcher had been silent so long, had borne so much without complaint, that now it burst from her in a torrent, not to be stayed. All her most secret doubts and her sweetest hopes seemed trembling on her lips or surging in her brain, racking her poor, emaciated frame for utterance. Now that death was sure, she was determined to rid her bosom of its perilous stuff. Martha was appalled. I used to think that when I got married, I'd be perfectly happy, but I have never been happy since. It was the beginning of trouble for me. I never found things better than they looked. They was always worse. I've gone further and farther from the sunshiny meadow and the birds and the flowers, and I'll never get back to 'em again. Never. She ended with a sob and a low wail. Her face was horrifying with its intensity of pathetic regret. Her straining, wide-open eyes seemed to be seeing those sunny spots in the meadow. Maddie, sometimes when I'm asleep, I think I'm back there again. And you girls are there, and we're pulling off the leaves of the wild sunflower. Rich man, poor man, beggar man. And I hear you all laugh when I pull off the last leaf, and when I come to myself, I'm an old, dried-up woman, dying unsatisfied. I felt that way a little myself, Matilde, confessed the watcher in a scared whisper. I knew it, Maddie. I knew you'd know how I felt. Things have been better for you. You ain't had to live in an old log house all your life and work yourself to skin and bone for a man you don't respect nor like. Matilde Bent, take that back. Take it back. For mercy's sake, don't you dare die thinking that... Don't you even dare. Bent, hearing her voice rising, came to the door, and the wife, knowing his step, cried, Don't let him in. Don't. I can't bear him. Keep him out. I don't want to see him again. What do you mean? Not Joe? Yes, him. Had the dying woman confessed to murder, good Martha could not have been more shocked. She could not understand this terrible revulsion in feeling, for she herself had been absolutely loyal to her husband through all the trials which had come upon them. But she met Mr. Bent at the threshold, and closing the door, went out with him into the summer kitchen where the rest of the family were sitting. A gloomy silence fell on them all after the greetings were over. The men were smoking. All were seated in chairs, tipped back against the wall. Joe Bent, a smallish man with a weak, good-natured face, asked in a hoarse whisper, How is she, Miss Ridings? Well, she seems quite strong, Mr. Bent. I think you had all better go to bed. If I want you, I can call you. The doctor gave me directions. All right, responded the relieved man. I'll sleep on the lounge in the other room if you want me. Just rap on the door. When, after making other arrangements, Martha went back to the bedroom, she was startled to hear the sick woman muttering to herself, or perhaps because she had forgotten Martha's absence altogether. But the shadows on the meadow didn't stay. They passed on. And then the sun was all the brighter on the flowers. We used to string sweet williams on spears of grass. Don't you remember? Martha gave her a drink of the opiate in the glass, adjusted her on the pillow, and threw open the window, even to the point of removing the screen, and the gibbous moon flooded the room with light. She did not light a lamp, for its flame would heat the room. Besides, the moonlight was sufficient. It fell on the face of the sick woman, just she looked like a thing of marble, all but her dark eyes.
Does the moon hurt you, Tilly? Should I put down the curtain?
The woman heard with difficulty, and when the question was repeated, she answered slowly, No, I like it. After a little. Don't you remember, Maddie, how beautiful the moonlight seemed? It seemed to promise happiness and love, but it never come for us. Makes me dream of the past now, just as it did of the future back then, and the whippoorwills too. The night was perfectly beautiful. Such a night as makes dying an infinite sorrow. The summer was at its fullest. Innumerable insects of the nocturnal sort were singing in unison with the frogs in the pools. A whippoorwill called, and its neighbor answered it like an echo. The leaves of the trees, glossy from the late rain, moved musically to the light west wind, and the exquisite perfume of many flowers came in on the light breeze. When the failing woman eventually sank into silence, Martha leaned her elbow on the windowsill and, gazing far into the great depths of space, gave herself up to unusual musings upon the problems of human life. She sighed deeply at times. She found herself at moments in the almost terrifying position of a human soul in space. Not a wife, not a mother, but just a soul facing the questions which harass philosophers. As she realized her condition of mind, she apprehended something of the thinking of the woman on the bed. Matilda had gone beyond, or far back, of the wife and mother at this point. The hours wore on. The dying woman stirred uneasily now and then, whispering a word or phrase which related to her girlhood, never to her later life. Once she said, "Oh, Mother, hold me. I'm so tired. Mother, hold me. I'm so tired." Martha took the thin form in her arms and, laying her head close beside the sunken cheek, sang in a half-breath a lullaby till the sufferer grew quiet again. The eastern moon passed over the house, leaving the room dark and still. The patient watcher sat beside the bed, listening to the slow breathing of the dying one. cool air grew almost chill. The east began to lighten, and with the coming light, the tide of life sank in the dying body. The head, hitherto restlessly turning, ceased to move. The eyes grew quiet and began to soften like a sleeper's.
How are you now, dear?
Asked the watcher several times, bending over the bed and smoothing back the straying head.
I'm tired. I'm tired, Mother. Mother would turn me.
She murmured drowsily, with heavy lids drooping. Martha adjusted the pillows again and turned the face to the wall. The poor, tortured, restless brain slowly stopped its grinding whirl, and the thin limbs, heavy with years of hopeless toil, straightened out in an endless sleep. Matilda Fletcher had found rest. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Fireside Tales with Wolfgang. To view more of my work, check out my YouTube channel at Hunter's Acoustic Cabin. Directed by Hunter Ackerman. Endorsed by Wolfgang Beastly. Produced by GWC Productions. Originally broadcast on GWC Productions YouTube channel, CAPS Media Television Channel 6, KPPQ LP Ventura at 104.1 FM, and on the KPPQ Podcast Network.